When the video leaked, everyone thought it was a scandal. A billionaire whispering to a 19-year-old maid, "Too big, just sit on it and do it." The clip was 20 seconds long, grainy and shaky, filmed through a half-open door. Within an hour, it was everywhere on TikTok, Twitter, and every gossip site that lived off humiliation. The caption read, "Billionaire predator caught on tape." At 7 a.m., New York woke up to hashtags like #TooBigChallenge and #Billionaire Scandal trending at number 1. News anchors called it the biggest corporate shock of the year. Ethan Vail, the reclusive tech billionaire who built the world's most secure AI networks, was now the most exposed man on the planet. Reporters camped outside his glass tower headquarters. Investors demanded statements. Lawyers scrambled to do damage control. And in the middle of the storm stood Sofia Ramirez, the maid from the video. The girl whose face the tabloids zoomed in on like prey. By noon, paparazzi had found her apartment in Queens. They followed her to the subway, flashing cameras, as if fame were a crime. Some shouted questions. "Is it true he paid you millions? Do you love him?" Her phone flooded with messages, half threats, half pity. A cousin she had not spoken to in years texted, "Congratulations, rich girl." Sophia locked herself in her small bathroom, shaking, watching her own trembling reflection as her name rolled across TV screens. Outside, people argued over her dignity like it was public property. At the same time in the Hamptons, Ethan sat in his rehabilitation room, his phone lighting up, with notifications he wished he could delete from his life. The same room the video had been filmed, in bright, sterile smelling of metal and antiseptic. The same room where he had been learning to stand again after a plane crash that almost paralyzed him. His face was pale under the cold light, his eyes hollow with disbelief. The whisper that had gone viral was never meant for the world. It had been meant for courage, yet the internet had already judged. His board of directors called in panic. "The stock is crashing, Ethan. We need a statement now." Ethan listened in silence, as if drowning in static. He looked at the paused frame on his tablet, her face close to his hand resting against the rehabilitation bar. The internet saw sin, he saw survival. Then a breaking headline flashed across the TV wall. "Billionaire predation investigation underway." Former employees speak out. Fabricated testimonies filled the screen. People claiming they had seen him flirt with staff, insult subordinates, demand obedience. His company's PR team begged him to blame her, to call it manipulation, but Ethan refused. His silence was interpreted as guilt. Meanwhile, the online world turned Sophia into a meme. Teenagers mocked her body shape, copying her posture, using filters to exaggerate her size. The cruelest trend was called "Sit on It Challenge," where influencers mimicked the phrase with laughter. Sophia's agency fired her that afternoon, citing brand risk. By midnight, she was unemployed, publicly shamed, and terrified to leave home. Her younger brother asked through the door, "Why are they saying bad things about you?" She answered through tears, "They just don't know the truth." Cameras flashed outside her window as if hunting for pain. And inside, Ethan Vail opened his laptop to write a statement. But no words came. He remembered how it had all started 3 months earlier. The day she first stepped into his life with a mop and a quiet smile, too brave for a world that mocked softness. He closed the laptop, leaned back against the cold chair, and whispered to himself, "Maybe the world doesn't deserve to know what really happened." Then he looked up to the security camera in the corner, the same one that had betrayed them, and said quietly, "But I will tell it anyway." The scene froze there in the dim blue light. His reflection fractured across the glass. His eyes filled not with anger, but with something heavier. Sorrow or maybe regret. Then the narration cut in, low and calm. 3 months earlier, before the world called him a monster, and before she became a symbol of shame. Before the internet took their story and burned it, for entertainment there was only a man learning to walk again, and a girl who refused to laugh at his pain. That was how it really began. The morning light in the Hamptons was merciless white, slicing through the curtains of Ethan Vale's seaside mansion, like truth cutting through glass. For 3 years he had avoided that light, living behind tinted windows and the hum of machines that monitored his every breath. The world called him the Phantom CEO because no one had seen him in public since the accident. The crash that turned his private jet into a fireball off Long Island Sound. His survival was a miracle, but it came with a price. The surgeons rebuilt his spine with titanium rods, yet they could not restore what he lost inside the sense of being whole. Every movement hurt, every sound reminded him of falling. In silence, he ran his empire through encrypted calls, giving orders with precision and cold logic. Money obeyed him, but his own body would not. He spent mornings with physical therapists who came and went, never lasting more than a week. They whispered about his temper, his perfectionism, his refusal to be touched. He fired them all. The latest one left in tears, muttering that the man had no soul left. He didn't argue because he wasn't sure she was wrong. His only constant companion was the sound of the ocean, hitting the glass walls at night. The company he built, Vale Industries, was thriving, a global tech fortress of security software that protected billion-dollar secrets, yet Ethan could not secure his own peace. When his assistant Logan brought a folder of new staffing requests, he barely looked up. "I told you no more live-in staff," he said flatly. Logan adjusted his glasses. "Sir, we need a cleaning rotation. The agency insists on basic hygiene standards. Fine, choose whoever you want. Just no questions, no interviews." The next morning, a girl showed up. Sophia Ramirez, 19 years old, 5'8", with soft dark hair, pulled into a messy bun and a uniform that hung awkwardly on her frame. She introduced herself with a nervous smile. "Good morning, Mr. Vale. I'm from Ocean Clean Services. I'll be quiet." He glanced at her once from his wheelchair and nodded without expression. "You have the East Wing. Don't touch anything that looks expensive." "That leaves almost nothing," she said under her breath. But he heard it, and something in his chest almost laughed. Almost. For days they hardly spoke. She cleaned, humming softly to herself, a sound that filled the sterile mansion with something unplanned, something human. Ethan ignored it at first, then found himself listening through the walls, the way a blind man listens for proof of life. One afternoon he heard a crash and hurried into the rehabilitation room, pushing the wheels of his chair faster than he had in months. Sophia was kneeling beside the therapy bar's papers scattered everywhere, her hands trembling. "I'm so sorry," she blurted out. "I was trying to wipe the mirrors. I didn't see the equipment." He looked at her face, flushed eyes wide with embarrassment, then at the fallen crutches beside her. He said quietly, "It's fine. You don't have to hide from me." She blinked, unsure what he meant, until she noticed his reflection in the mirror. The metal brace running along his spine, visible under the thin shirt. Most people flinched or pretended not to see. She didn't. She simply stood, helped him pick up the papers, and said softly, "Everyone falls, Mr. Vale. That's why there are floors." The words disarmed him more than pity ever could. After she left, he sat staring at the mirror, seeing not a billionaire or a cripple, but a man who had just been spoken to like he was ordinary. That night he could not sleep. He replayed her tone, the absence of judgment, the casual courage. He found himself checking the camera feed, watching her close up the cleaning cart. Her movements slow, deliberate, like someone carrying invisible weight. The next morning when she returned, she found him already waiting in the therapy room. "I'll handle the mirrors," he said. She smiled slightly. "You plan to fire me for honesty? I've fired people for less," he said, but his eyes softened. She handed him a towel. "You missed a spot for the first time since the accident." Someone had handed him something without fear. The following week, she became part of his routine, though neither admitted it. She arrived before sunrise, brewed his coffee, the way he preferred, dark, no sugar, and left a note on the tray that read, "Good morning, the world's still here." He read it twice every day. The therapists noticed the change. He started standing longer, holding the bars with steadier hands. One asked if he wanted company at lunch. He shook his head, thinking of the girl humming somewhere down the hall. That evening, as the sun dropped over the ocean, Ethan wheeled himself onto the terrace, watching waves crash against the rocks. Sophia stepped out with a basket of linens, startled to find him there. She hesitated. "Sir, you should be inside, the wind's cold," he said quietly. "It's the first time I've felt it in years." The breeze tangled her hair. She laughed. "You're weird, you know that. Billionaires don't feel the weather." "Maybe that's why they lose touch with reality," he replied. She looked at him differently, then not as a boss, but as a man trying to find his place in a body that betrayed him. Before going back inside, she said, "If you ever need help standing up, just ask." He didn't answer, but later that night, when his back locked mid-session, he remembered her words. The following morning, she found him collapsed near the bars, sweating with pain. Without hesitation, she knelt, slid her arm under his, and said, "Come on, don't let the floor win." Together, they managed to get him upright, both breathing hard. He whispered, "You don't have to help me." She smiled, breathless. "Maybe I do." For a moment, neither moved, their reflections trembling in the mirror. A man built of steel and a girl made of courage. He looked at her and thought maybe the world had sent her not to clean his house, but to remind him it was still possible to live inside it. The storm rolled in without warning, thick gray clouds swallowing the horizon as rain slammed against the windows of the Vale mansion. The security lights flickered, then steadied again, bathing the marble floors in cold white. Sophia had stayed late finishing her cleaning rounds because the bridge to town was closed. The staff had gone hours ago, leaving only her and Ethan inside the enormous house that felt less like a home and more like a cathedral for ghosts. Lightning flashed, revealing her reflection in the glass bucket, in hand hair damp from the humidity. She whispered to herself, "Guess I'm stuck here tonight." Ethan heard her voice echo through the hallways and appeared in the doorway of the rehabilitation room, leaning heavily on his cane. "The power's out in half the county." He said quietly, "You can use the guest room." Sophia shook her head. "I'll just stay on the couch." He didn't argue. He returned to his therapy bench, but she noticed how pale he looked, how his hand trembled when he reached for the bars. "You should rest," she said. He ignored her, gripping the metal rails with the stubborn pride that had built an empire. "I rest too much," he muttered. "I need to feel something." The thunder outside cracked so loud it made her jump. He tried to take a step, but the floor was slick from a small puddle of water that had leaked through the door. His crutch slid. Sophia lunged forward just as he fell. The next second they were both on the ground, his weight knocking the breath from her chest, the smell of rain and antiseptic between them. Her hand was pressed against his shoulder, his face inches from hers, his breath shaky. "You fall harder than your stock prices, Mr. Vale," she whispered, trying not to laugh. For a heartbeat, the corners of his mouth twitched. Then he actually laughed, a sound raw and disbelieving echoing in the empty room. The storm outside howled, but inside it was strangely quiet. He realized she was still holding on to him, their bodies tangled awkwardly, his chest rising against hers. "You can let go now," he said, but his voice came out softer than intended. She blinked. "Oh, right, sorry." She pushed herself up, helping him sit. His knee was bleeding from the fall. Without thinking, she tore a piece of her cleaning cloth, dipped it into the nearby basin, and knelt to clean the cut. Her hands were gentle but unafraid. "I've done this for my brother when he played soccer," she said. "You're not squeamish?" he asked, watching her concentration. "I don't have time to be squeamish," she answered. "People like me don't get that luxury." He looked at her profile, the determination in her face, the way she spoke without self-pity. When was the last time someone had treated him without worship or fear? Maybe never. She glanced up, catching him staring. What he asked. "You're different than I thought," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" She hesitated. "You look like someone who got everything they wanted, but never what they needed." He froze, not from offense, but from recognition. "That's one way to put it." When she finished cleaning the wound, she sat back on her heels, satisfied. "You should be fine unless you're secretly made of glass." He smiled faintly. "My body, maybe. My pride, definitely." The power flickered again, throwing the room into shadow. The wind moaned through the cracks of the old structure. "You should eat something," she said, standing up. "There's still food in the kitchen." He shook his head. "I'm not hungry." "You're lying," she replied. Billionaires lie about being fine the way poor people lie about being happy. That made him laugh again, the sound deeper this time. "Fine," he said, "lead the way." They ended up in the kitchen, sitting across from each other while the storm raged outside. Sophia heated leftover pasta in the microwave and slid the plate to him. He hesitated before taking a bite, as if rediscovering the act of eating in company. She poured herself coffee, watching him from the corner of her eye. "So what happened to you?" she asked finally. "The accident," he said flatly. "My plane went down. I was lucky." She tilted her head. "You call this lucky?" He shrugged. "Some people didn't walk away at all." "And you?" he asked, turning the question on her. "How does a girl like you end up cleaning oceanfront mansions?" She looked down, stirring her coffee. "When people look at me, they see weight not worth. It's hard to get a job when every interviewer stares at your body before your resume. Cleaning's honest work, at least." He studied her the way he used to study market trends, searching for truth between lines. "You've been through things, haven't you?" "Everyone has," she said, "but I don't hide mine behind glass walls." For a long moment they sat in silence, broken only by thunder. Then he said quietly, "I can't feel below my waist." She looked up startled. He continued, "The doctors say some nerves might recover, but probably not all. I wake up every day, pretending it doesn't matter, but it does." She nodded slowly. "So we're both broken," she said softly. Maybe he replied, or maybe we're just different shapes of whole. That line hung between them, delicate as breath. The rain eased, turning into a steady rhythm, like heartbeat on glass. She smiled faintly. "I should probably check the windows before the whole house floods." He watched her leave, her silhouette framed by candlelight, and for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like punishment. Later that night, when he lay in bed, he could still hear her laughter echoing through the halls, the sound blending with the sea. It was absurd how alive it made him feel. He whispered into the dark, maybe to her, maybe to himself, "You fall harder than your stock prices, Mr. Vale." And for once, he didn't mind the fall at all. Morning light leaked through the windows like forgiveness after a long night. The storm had passed but left its scent behind salt rain and renewal. Ethan sat in the rehabilitation room earlier than usual, staring at the parallel bars like an enemy he was learning to respect. His muscles still ached from the fall, yet something inside him felt different. Not broken, not numb, just aware. When Sophia entered carrying a tray of coffee and breakfast, she found him already trying to stand. She set the tray down quickly. "You should wait for me. I can't wait forever," he replied, his voice rough from effort. She crossed the floor, adjusting the safety strap around his torso. He winced when she tightened it. "Breathe," she said softly. "The body listens better when it knows it's safe." He gave a small laugh. "Is that what you tell yourself too?" She smiled without answering. He gripped the bars, his knuckles whitening. His legs trembled as he pushed up an inch, then two. For the first time since the crash, he stood, not steadily, not gracefully, but upright. She stepped closer instinctively, one hand hovering near his waist. His breath caught pain shooting up his spine. "It's too much," she said. "Too big a move. Too big." He forced a shaky grin. "Then maybe I just need to sit on it and do it." Sophia froze mid-breath, startled by the phrasing. Then, as he grimaced and lowered himself back onto the therapy bench, realization dawned. He was talking about the balance ball, the large foam roller he used to stabilize his back. He wasn't being crude. He was trying to joke through pain. For a moment, the absurdity of it all, the billionaire with titanium in his spine, making cowboy metaphors in a luxury rehab room, was too much. She burst out laughing. He looked up at her laughter like a man seeing sunlight after months underground. What he asked? That's your motivational quote now, she teased. Too big, just sit on it and do it. He chuckled weakly. Maybe I'll print it on a poster, inspire millions, or traumatize them, she said, still laughing. He smiled fully, then the kind of smile that didn't need an audience. They stayed that way for a while, two people sharing oxygen and awkward joy in a room that had only ever known silence. Later that day, when she returned to clean, he asked her to stay during his next session. The therapist canceled, he explained. You've got a steady hand. You'll do fine. I'm not trained for that, she said. I'll teach you, he replied simply. So she stayed. She learned to strap the brace properly, to measure his steps between the bars to remind him when to breathe. It became a ritual. She'd count quietly under her breath. He'd focus on her voice. When his legs shook, she steadied him. When frustration hit, she'd say, "You've faced worse things than gravity." One afternoon, he stumbled and caught her arm to keep from falling. Their bodies collided, the air thick with proximity. For a split second, neither moved. His hand gripped her shoulder for balance. Her heart raced against her ribs. "You okay?" she asked. "I forgot what okay feels like," he whispered, still catching his breath. She didn't pull away. "You're allowed to feel again, Ethan." Her voice was barely a whisper now. He met her gaze, something flickering there. Fear, maybe longing, maybe both. "You make it sound simple," he murmured. "It isn't," she said, "but it's worth it." That night she stayed later than usual, helping him stretch. He lay on the mat, she knelt beside him, counting his slow breaths. The room was dim, just one lamp burning gold against the gray. "Why do you help me?" he asked suddenly. "Because you keep trying," she said. "Most people give up when life gets heavy." He turned his head to look at her. "And I've been heavy all my life," she said with a wry smile. "It's what keeps me grounded." He laughed quietly. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone who'd pity me," he said. "You don't. Pity doesn't heal," she replied. "Only honesty does." Her words landed like truth he had forgotten existed. He closed his eyes, breathing deeper now, guided by her voice counting. In and out, in and out. For the first time since the accident, his chest loosened. The next morning, Sophia found a note, waiting on the tray. In neat handwriting, it read, "You don't have to hide from me." Then, she folded the note and slipped it into her pocket. Her heart beating faster than logic allowed. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of quiet companionship. He practiced walking. She timed his steps. They shared jokes that weren't funny, but made them laugh anyway. Every time he stood longer, she clapped softly. Every time he stumbled, she said, "So what? The floor's there to catch you." And every time he looked at her, the air changed shape. One evening, after another long session, Ethan sank onto the bench, exhausted. His shirt clung to his back, sweat tracing scars down his spine. Sophia handed him a towel. "You did better today." "Define better," he said between breaths. "You didn't curse once," she teased. "That's progress." He looked up at her eyes, dark but warm. "You make me want to keep trying." Her throat tightened. "That's the point." Silence lingered, comfortable, fragile, and new. He broke it with a half smile. "Too big." "Just sit on it and do it," he said again, deliberately repeating the phrase that had once made her laugh. This time the words sounded different, not about therapy or pain, but about courage, about choosing to live. She shook her head, smiling. That's never going to stop sounding wrong, you know. Maybe that's why it sticks, he replied, because truth never sounds polite. That night when she left the mansion, she looked back once through the glass walls. Ethan stood by the window, upright and unsteady, but standing. The ocean behind him caught the last of the sun, painting his reflection in gold. Sophia whispered to herself, "He's learning to stand again." She didn't realize she was learning, too, to believe in something that wasn't supposed to happen, in someone who was supposed to be unreachable. And somewhere deep inside Ethan Vale, a whisper echoed that would outlive the walls of that room. "Too big," he murmured again, smiling faintly to himself. "Just do it anyway." The mansion felt different that evening, quieter, more intimate, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Ethan had asked Sophia to stay for dinner, saying it was a thank you for helping him walk again. She almost said no, afraid of what people might think, but there was something in his eyes that made refusal impossible. When she entered the dining room, the long table that usually looked like a boardroom meeting was stripped down to something simple. One pizza still in its box. 2 plates, candles flickering, and empty wine bottles. The billionaire who once hosted galas for senators was sitting at the head of the table, barefoot and smiling like a man, trying to remember how to be human. She hesitated at the door. "You really ordered pizza for dinner?" He nodded. "I didn't know what normal people eat together. This felt safe." She laughed softly, walking in. "Safe is subjective." He poured her sparkling water as if it were champagne. For a while they ate in comfortable silence, the sound of the ocean crashing faintly outside. Then he said, "I used to think money could buy peace. Turns out it only rents silence." Sophia looked at him closely, his hands strong but scarred his eyes, carrying a weariness that didn't belong to a man his age. "You don't seem like someone who enjoys silence anymore." He met her gaze. "Not since you started humming around the house." She smiled, the faintest blush on her cheeks. "That's just habit. My mom used to say, singing keeps the fear away." "It works," he said. The candlelight made everything softer, his expression, his voice, his guarded heart. She asked quietly, "What's it like being you?" He thought for a long time before answering. "Lonely. The world keeps telling you you're lucky until you start feeling guilty for being sad." The crash made it worse. Everyone wanted the comeback story, not the truth. "I'm not the same. My legs work differently. My body responds differently. I don't even know if I can ever be with someone again." Sophia's brow furrowed. "You mean physically?" He nodded. The word hung there unspoken but heavy. She leaned forward. "You think love is about performance, but maybe it's about presence." He blinked, unsure how to respond. Her tone was simple, without pity. Just real. She set her slice down and continued. "Sometimes I wonder if anyone will ever love me too. People stare at my body before they listen to me. They think softness means weakness. You hide behind money. I hide behind noise. But maybe we're both just afraid of being seen." Ethan's throat tightened. For the first time in years, someone had spoken straight through his armor. He reached across the table, touching her hand gently. "Sophia," he whispered. She didn't pull away. The electricity between them was quiet but undeniable. He looked at her the way a drowning man looks at air, as if afraid to move in case it disappeared. "You said once that everyone falls," he murmured. "What if this is me falling?" "Then fall," she said. "Just make sure it's forward." He laughed softly, but his voice trembled. They sat like that for what felt like hours, the storm replaced by a fragile calm. Finally, she asked, "Tell me something true." He hesitated, then said, "I'm terrified." "Of what?" "Of touching someone and not feeling enough. Of being touched and being pitied." She squeezed his hand. "Then let's make it not about that." When she stood and came around the table, he stayed perfectly still. Her steps were slow, deliberate, her breath shallow. She knelt beside his chair, so their eyes were level. "You don't have to prove anything, Ethan. Just be here." Her hand came up to his face, thumb brushing the faint stubble along his jaw. His eyes closed instinctively, leaning into her touch. It wasn't lust that filled the room, it was recognition. He reached for her hand, pressing it against his heart. "Feel that still works." Sophia smiled, tears threatening, but never falling. "Then that's all that matters." He moved, first closing the space between them, his lips brushing hers, tentative as if asking permission. She answered by deepening the kiss, slow and honest and trembling. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard, not from passion, but from the weight of vulnerability. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered. "Me neither," she said. "So let's learn together." They spent the night not as billionaire and maid, but as two people rediscovering touch. The room was quiet, except for the sound of rain starting again outside, the soft rhythm syncing with their hearts. When he kissed her again, it wasn't desperate. It was gentle, deliberate, like learning to walk. His hands moved with care, hers with trust. They explored the distance between fear and tenderness until it disappeared. Later, as they lay in the aftermath, neither spoke. The air was thick with something sacred. He stared at the ceiling, her head on his chest, feeling the faint thrum of life beneath his skin. "Do you regret this?" he asked finally. She shook her head against him. "No, I think this was always going to happen. Maybe the universe got tired of waiting for you to stand up." He smiled, eyes closing. "Maybe it sent you to make sure I did." Before sleep took them, she whispered into the quiet, "Thank you for letting me see you." His answer was a soft breath against her hair. "Thank you for seeing me." And somewhere beyond the walls, beyond the ocean, the world kept spinning, unaware that a man who thought he was broken and a woman who thought she was too much had just rewritten what wholeness looked like. The morning after felt impossibly quiet, like the world was holding its breath before the storm. Ethan woke, first sunlight spilling through the open curtains, cutting gold lines across Sophia's sleeping face. For the first time in years, he felt something simple and rare peace. He reached to touch her hair, but stopped midway, afraid to break the moment. Outside, seagulls cried over the ocean, and the house seemed to exhale. But peace never lasts long for people like him. By noon, the whisper of disaster had already begun. The security team called first, a breach in the server miner, they said. But Ethan's instincts screamed otherwise. Within an hour, Logan, his assistant, arrived pale and sweating. Someone leaked footage from the rehab room, he said. "It's going viral." Ethan's stomach sank. "What footage?" "From 3 nights ago," Logan stammered. It's cut out of context. You're saying something. What am I saying? Ethan snapped. Logan swallowed hard. Too big. Just sit on it and do it. For a moment, Ethan thought the man was joking, but the horror on Logan's face said otherwise. His mind raced back to that night, the laughter, the clumsy encouragement, the way Sophia's laughter had filled the room. And now, stripped of context, it sounded like something else entirely. Who saw it? Ethan asked. Everyone, Logan said. It's everywhere. The media, the internet, even the board. Ethan stood so fast his chair rolled back. Get it taken down. We're trying, sir, but it's too late. There are hundreds of copies. They're calling it the Too Big Scandal. He didn't have time to breathe before the news alerts flooded in. His name, her name twisted into clickbait and judgment. Sophia heard the first echoes of it when her phone buzzed nonstop. At first, she thought it was a mistake, a cruel meme, but when she opened Twitter, her world shattered. Her photo taken from the security feed was plastered beside headlines. Billionaire predator caught with 19-year-old maid. Power and abuse in the Hamptons. Her stomach turned. The video was only 20 seconds long. Her nervous laughter mistaken for submission, his whisper stripped of meaning. She could see the comments even before she read them. She's after his money. Look at her, no wonder he kept her hidden. She seduced him for fame. Each word was a cut that bled her dry. Ethan called, but she couldn't answer. Her voice would have broken. By afternoon, the story hit every major network. The board issued a statement distancing themselves from his private misconduct. Sponsors suspended contracts. His company's stock plummeted 17% in one day. When he finally got Sophia on the phone, her voice was shaking. They're saying things about me, Ethan. About you. I can't even go outside. Don't, he said sharply. Stay there, I'll fix this. You can't, she whispered. They think I'm... They're wrong, it doesn't matter, she said. People believe what they want. His chest tightened. Come to the house. No, she said. If I go back there, it'll only make it worse. They'll say you're protecting me. I am protecting you. From what she asked bitterly. The truth or the lies? Her voice cracked, and he had no answer. When the call ended, he stared at the phone, feeling the world tilt under his feet again. The same helplessness he felt in the wreckage of the plane. Came roaring back fire metal silence, and now her voice fading like smoke. That night, news vans parked outside his gates, drones hovered over the estate, headlines screamed of scandal and betrayal. Sophia's agency dropped her citing moral violations. Her landlord slipped a notice under her door, due to media disturbance, lease terminated. She packed what little she had into a backpack and left under cover of night. Ethan tried to reach her again, but she didn't pick up. The board called an emergency meeting. The chairman's voice was cold. You need to issue a statement denying everything. Say she misled you. Say she blackmailed you. Ethan stared at the men on his screen, men who had never believed in anything except money. She didn't do anything wrong, he said quietly. She worked for me. She saved my life. You're not listening, another interrupted. If you don't disavow her, you lose the company. Then I lose the company, Ethan said, standing. You'd throw away billions for a maid. One of them sneered. Ethan's jaw clenched. For the only person who ever treated me like a man, not a brand. He hung up. Outside rain began to fall, again soft at first, then heavier. The world had turned on him, and yet all he could think of was how she must be, feeling alone, blamed, hunted. He opened his laptop. The video played again, distorted and cruel. The words sounded alien coming from his mouth. He shut it off, disgusted. Somewhere in Queens, Sophia sat on the floor of a cheap motel, scrolling through comments she should never have read. Every insult echoed like truth. "I didn't do anything wrong," she whispered, but even she didn't believe it anymore. Her phone buzzed again, a message from Ethan. "Don't believe them. I'm fighting this." She stared at the screen, tears blurring her vision. "You can't fight the internet," she typed back, but didn't send it. Instead, she put the phone face down and cried quietly until dawn. At the mansion, Ethan sat by the dark window, watching lightning split the sea. His reflection stared back at him, tired, furious, alive. He whispered into the storm, "I'll fix this, Sophia. I swear I will." But he didn't know yet how. Weeks passed, and the world showed no mercy. The scandal grew like wildfire, feeding on outrage and half-truths, until even people who had never heard of Ethan Vale had an opinion about him. Talk shows mocked the incident. Late-night comedians turned it into punchlines. The internet didn't want the truth. It wanted entertainment. Sophia disappeared into the noise. She found work delivering food in Queens, wearing a cap low over her face. Her phone pinging with orders, while strangers whispered behind her back at the sound of her name. Every time she saw her reflection in a store window, it felt like looking at someone the world had already decided was guilty. She had stopped answering Ethan's calls weeks ago. Not out of anger, but because every word with him hurt too much. One evening, as she handed an order to a customer, she saw her own face flash across a TV screen inside the restaurant. The headline read, "The Billionaire's Maid." Leaked messages confirm the affair. Her breath caught. She walked closer and saw fake screenshots, AI-generated texts showing her begging for money, manipulating him for fame. The anchor's voice dripped with false sympathy. Sources close to the investigation claim she targeted Mr. Vale emotionally during his recovery. Sophia turned and ran outside as rain started to fall. Her delivery bag soaked through her chest, burning. She leaned against a lamppost, whispering to herself, "That's not me. That's not real." But no one was listening. Meanwhile, in the mansion that had once been her sanctuary, Ethan was discovering the rot inside his own empire. The hacker had been traced, not an outsider, but someone within his personal staff. When the investigator slid the report across his desk, Ethan's hands went cold. The leak came from Logan's login credentials. His assistant, his friend, the same man who had been with him since before the crash. He sold the footage to the tabloids, the investigator said quietly. $50,000. He also supplied internal emails and schedules. Ethan felt his chest tighten. Why the investigator hesitated. They offered him a job at a competitor firm. "He said you were finished anyway." Ethan stood pushing back his chair with a scrape that echoed through the silent office. "Get out," he said. When he was alone, he stared at the glass walls of his home and realized how many cracks he had ignored. Loyalty, built on payroll privacy, bought with NDAs, affection, paid in bonuses. He had built an empire of obedience, not trust. He fired everyone that afternoon. Security, PR, the entire communications team. Then he called his lawyer. "Cancel the silence. I'm going public." The lawyer panicked. "Ethan, you'll be crucified. There's an ongoing investigation." "Then I'll burn the investigation too," Ethan said. "But I'm not letting them destroy her name." 2 days later, he walked into CNN's Manhattan studio. On a cane, the cameras flashing like gunfire. The host greeted him with the cautious politeness reserved for controversial guests. "Mr. Vale," she began, "the world has seen the video. Millions believe you exploited a 19-year-old employee. What do you want to say to them?" Ethan looked into the lens, his reflection small inside the red recording light. "You've all seen 20 seconds of my life and decided you know who I am," he said. "But you saw a moment of laughter between two people learning to live again. You saw a man broken by an accident, and a woman brave enough to treat him like he was still human. You turned that into filth because kindness doesn't sell." The host blinked, thrown off by his calm tone. "Are you admitting there was a relationship?" "I'm admitting that she gave me back my will to stand," he said. "If I'm guilty of anything, it's of finally feeling human again." The studio fell silent. The clip aired that night across every major network, spreading faster than the scandal itself. Hashtags flipped from hate to heartbreak. #human again trended worldwide. People began to ask questions. Why had the footage been edited? Who profited from it? And why no one had asked Sophia her side? For the first time, public sympathy shifted. Sophia saw the interview from the corner of a diner TV while waiting for her next delivery. Her hand trembled as she watched him speak. His eyes raw, his voice steady. She covered her mouth, fighting tears. "He didn't blame me," she whispered. The diner owner glanced over. "That your billionaire guy?" Sophia shook her head but smiled faintly. "No," she said. "That's the man who stood up for me." Back in the Hamptons, Ethan's board called an emergency session, demanding he retract the interview. "You've turned yourself into a martyr," one of them shouted over the speaker. "The shareholders are panicking." Ethan leaned forward. "Then tell them to invest in something real. You're destroying yourself." "For that girl," another barked. "No," he said. "I'm saving what's left of my soul." He closed the call and turned off his phone. The world could wait. He had someone to find. He spent the next day calling every contact he had, every journalist who might know her whereabouts. When one of his old drivers mentioned seeing Sophia delivering food in Queens, Ethan didn't hesitate. He got in the car himself, ignoring the warnings from his doctor, ignoring the pain shooting through his spine. It was raining again, heavy this time, blurring the streets into silver. The car stopped outside a small diner near Roosevelt Avenue. Through the fogged glass, he saw her hair tucked under a cap, handing a customer a bag. Her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. He opened the door and stepped out. Cane in hand, heart hammering, each step felt like climbing a mountain. When the doorbell chimed and she looked up, the world went silent. She froze, eyes wide disbelief, flickering into something like fear. He stood there dripping wet, his cane unsteady but his gaze unwavering. "Ethan," she breathed, "you shouldn't be here. Neither should you." He said, his voice low, rough. "You told me to stand up again. I did. But I can't stand without you." A few customers looked over, recognizing him from the news. Phones came out, cameras started recording, but this time Ethan didn't care. He stepped closer, his hand trembling. "I'm sorry I didn't protect you sooner," he said. "I was scared of losing everything. But you were everything." Her lip quivered. "Ethan, they're filming. Let them," he said. "They filmed our worst moment. Let them see the truth too." And right there in the middle of the diner, he took her hands in his. "You told me once that real doesn't need to be perfect. I finally understand that." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "You're insane," she whispered. "Probably," he said. "But so is love." The crowd was silent now, the sound of rain and camera shutters blending into something that almost sounded like applause. Sophia looked at him, at the man who had everything, and risked it all to give her back her name, and in that moment, she didn't care who was watching. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. The room erupted in flashes of light, but all Ethan felt was her warmth against him, the steady beat of her heart, proving the world hadn't broken them after all. The video from the diner exploded across every platform before midnight, and for the first time since the scandal began, people stopped laughing and started listening. The raw, unedited footage showed Ethan Vale limping into the rain-soaked diner, pleading for forgiveness, not with arrogance or wealth, but with vulnerability. "You told me to stand up again. I did. But I can't stand without you," became the most replayed line on TikTok, turning into a symbol of accountability and love. Millions shared it with captions like, "When men own their mistakes and love that doesn't care about cameras." The internet that once devoured them began to rebuild them pixel by pixel in empathy. Sophia woke up the next morning to her phone buzzing with thousands of messages. Not hate this time, but hope. Women wrote that they believed her now that they had been misjudged too, and that her courage gave them strength. She sat on the edge of her motel bed, crying quietly because she couldn't remember the last time people had spoken about her with kindness. Ethan's PR team called in disbelief, asking if this public confession had been planned. He laughed softly from his study, still smelling faintly of rain. "You can't script the truth," he said. When the board demanded damage control, he refused. "You can't fix what was never broken," he told them. "We were just human." Then he issued one final statement across all his company's social channels in his own words. "A woman's dignity is not collateral damage for profit. The narrative ends here. Let hers begin again." The post went viral instantly. For days, news outlets debated whether it was genius or madness, but the audience had already decided. They called it redemption, not strategy. The following week, Ethan drove back to Queens, this time in daylight. The diner owner greeted him with a grin. "You're the guy from the rain," he said. Ethan smiled. Guilty. Sophia was in the back restocking supplies when she saw him through the glass door. She hesitated 1 second too long, then went to him. He looked healthier, more grounded, still leaning on his cane, but no longer broken by it. "You found me again," she said quietly. "I wasn't done proving you right," he replied. "About what?" "That real love doesn't care about headlines." He reached into his coat pocket and handed her a folded document. "What's this?" she asked. "The deed to something new," he said. "A foundation. I'm calling it Real is Enough. It's for women who've been body-shamed, silenced, or slandered by media lies. You're going to run it." She blinked, stunned. "Ethan, I'm not qualified to run anything." "You're qualified to survive," he said, "and that's rarer than any degree." She opened the document and saw her name printed under director. Her throat closed. "You don't owe me this." "You're wrong," he said. "You taught me what honesty looks like when it costs everything." The following month, they launched the foundation together. The first press conference was small, held in the same diner where they had reunited. The crowd spilled onto the sidewalk as Sophia stepped up to the microphone. Her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "When they took my job, they called me a liar. When they took my name, they called me a scandal. But the truth is, they just couldn't believe someone like me deserved kindness. I'm not here to change their minds. I'm here to help the next girl who gets torn apart for being real." The applause was overwhelming. Ethan stood at the back, watching her shine with quiet pride. Later that day, a reporter asked if she forgave him. She smiled softly. "He never hurt me. The world did." That quote spread faster than the scandal ever had. It was printed on magazine covers and turned into murals in New York and Los Angeles. Real is Enough grew from a small office to a national network within 6 months, offering scholarships, therapy, and media defense for women whose stories were twisted online. Ethan returned to work, but with different priorities. He handed over most of his control to ethical leadership and focused on rehabilitation programs using his company's technology to protect people from deepfake abuse. Every headline that once cursed his name now called him the man who rebuilt redemption. But for him, none of it mattered as much as the nights when he and Sophia sat together in her new apartment above the foundation office, eating cheap takeout and laughing about everything they'd survived. One evening she asked, "Do you ever wish the scandal never happened?" He thought about it for a long moment. If it hadn't, he said, I might still be pretending I was alive. She leaned against his shoulder and whispered, "Then maybe it wasn't a scandal. Maybe it was a restart." He smiled, brushing his thumb along her hand. Maybe it was fate dressed as chaos. Outside, the city pulsed with life again, indifferent and forgiving all at once. The world had moved on, but not them. They had found something worth staying still for. A year later, the world no longer whispered the word scandal when it said their names. Instead, it spoke of rebirth. The real is enough. Foundation had become a movement. Murals of Sophia's face appeared across Los Angeles, with the words "Real is enough" painted in bold across her smile. Interviews flooded in, but she only accepted one, a quiet sit-down for Time magazine beside Ethan, who now walked with a soft, deliberate strength. His cane had become more of a symbol than a crutch, a reminder that recovery wasn't about perfection, but persistence. The interviewer asked what everyone wanted to know. You've both rebuilt your reputations, your lives, even your love. What changed? Sophia glanced at Ethan before answering. We stopped trying to be who people expected. We started being who we needed. Ethan nodded. People think redemption means rewriting your story. It doesn't. It means reading it out loud, even the ugly parts, and not flinching. The interviewer leaned forward. And what did you learn from all of this? Ethan smiled slightly. That love doesn't fix you, it just makes the pain worth surviving. The article broke records, not because it was sensational, but because it was honest. In a world addicted to perfection, their imperfection had become revolutionary. Later that month, they hosted their first scholarship gala for young women, overcoming public shaming and body image trauma. Sophia wore a simple ivory gown, no diamonds, no gloss, just her radiant in truth. When she walked onto the stage, Ethan watched from the side, pride swelling quietly inside him. She began her speech without notes. They once said I was too young, too soft, too much. They said my story was over before it even began. But today I stand in front of you, not as a victim, not as a headline, but as proof that the world cannot define you without your consent. If you've ever been told you are anything too loud, too quiet, too big, too broken, remember this: you are exactly the right size to hold your own story. The room fell silent, then erupted in applause that went on for minutes. Ethan's eyes stung as he stepped onto the stage beside her. He whispered just loud enough for her to hear. "You were born for this," she smiled, whispering back. "No, we were reborn for this." The next morning, social media was flooded again, but this time with celebration. Clips of Sophia's speech trended globally under #TheRebirth, and news outlets called it one of the most powerful redemption arcs of the decade. But beyond the headlines, their lives had grown quieter, fuller. They moved from the mansion in the Hamptons to a small beach house in Malibu. Mornings began with ocean air and coffee on the deck. Evenings with laughter over burnt pasta. Ethan spent his days mentoring entrepreneurs who had lost everything. Sophia ran workshops for girls learning to find their voices again. The world saw glamour, but what they built together was gentleness. One afternoon, as the tide came in, Sophia sat on the sand, sketching ideas for a children's book about self-worth. Ethan approached behind her, his footsteps uneven but confident. "Writing something new?" he asked. She nodded. "A story about a little girl who learns she's enough, even when people tell her otherwise." "Sounds familiar," he said. Maybe she teased, but this time no scandals, no billionaires, just truth. He smiled, sitting beside her, letting the surf touch their feet. "You know, I still get emails from men who say your story changed how they talk to women. They say they're learning to listen now." She turned to him. "And what about you? What did my story change in you?" He thought for a long time, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "It made me realize I was never paralyzed from the waist down," he said softly. "I was paralyzed from the heart out." She reached for his hand, squeezing it. "Not anymore." He looked at her sunlight reflecting in her eyes, and for a moment he saw not the maid who had entered his house years ago, but the woman who had rebuilt the meaning of strength. Somewhere behind them, waves whispered like applause. That night they watched the sunset together in silence. Sophia leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" she asked. He chuckled. "Every time someone says the words too big, I try not to flinch." She laughed, the sound pure and unguarded. "Who would have thought that sentence would lead us here?" "The universe," he said. "It's got a strange sense of humor." She turned to him, her voice a whisper against the sea breeze. "Then promise me something, anything, no matter what happens next, we stay real." He kissed her hand, always. The stars emerged one by one above them, quiet witnesses to their promise, and when dawn came, it didn't feel like another day. It felt like the continuation of something sacred. The story of two people who had already fallen, burned, and rebuilt themselves from ash into something stronger than forgiveness. 2 years later, the world had moved on, but their love hadn't faded. It had deepened in silence, away from headlines and hashtags. The Malibu beach house had become their home, the sound of the waves their only audience. Ethan Vale no longer walked with a cane, though he kept it by the door as a reminder of where he'd been. Sophia Vale, yes Vale, now sat at her desk overlooking the ocean, finishing the last chapter of her memoir titled, What Real Looks Like. The foundation had grown into an international movement. But today, there were no cameras, no interviews, just the smell of salt and coffee and the hum of life rebuilt from ruins. Outside the patio was set for something small, intimate, a handful of friends and the girls from their program. It wasn't a grand wedding. It had happened months ago, quietly in a courthouse. But tonight they were celebrating what came after the vows, the living part of love. Ethan stepped into the doorway, still in his white shirt sleeves, rolled his hair, silvering at the edges. "You ready?" he asked, his voice soft as surf. She looked up, smiling. "I've been ready for 2 years." He walked to her side, kissed her forehead, and glanced at the book. "You finished it." "Almost," she said. "I just need the last line." He tilted his head. "What are you going to write?" She met his gaze and said something true. They went outside together, where lanterns swung in the wind, and laughter drifted from the deck. The guests stood as they appeared, Sophia barefoot, in a simple linen dress, Ethan barefoot too, because he said shoes felt dishonest. The sunset bled gold across the ocean, turning the water into molten light. When they reached the center of the deck, the crowd fell silent. Sophia turned to him. 2 years ago, we were memes, she said, smiling. Now look at us, he chuckled. Still viral, but for the right reasons. She took his hand. Do you ever think about that night, the one that started it all? Every day, he said, not because of what the world saw, but because of what I felt. You looked at me like I wasn't broken anymore. She nodded, tears glinting in her eyes. That's because you never were. You just forgot. He pulled her close, his voice low near her ear. Still too big. She laughed through tears. No, she whispered, just big enough to hold everything I love. The crowd erupted in gentle applause, not the loud kind, but the kind that came from hearts that understood. A few hours later, after everyone left, they sat together under the lanterns that still glowed faintly against the dark sky. Sophia leaned back against his chest, watching the tide roll in. You know, she said, the internet thinks it made us famous. He smiled against her hair. Let them think that. We know the truth, which is that love doesn't need PR. It just survives everything fake. She turned and kissed him slow and grateful. The moon rose full over the water, painting them in silver. Inside the house, her unfinished book sat open on the desk, the cursor blinking at the end of the final paragraph. When she went inside later to close it, she typed the last line without hesitation. They tried to make her a meme. They turned him into a headline. But love has no PR team. It just survives everything fake. She hit save, then joined him on the deck again where he was watching the stars. What real looks like, she murmured. Exactly this, he replied. In the distance, waves crashed, and the wind carried the scent of the sea, mingling with the warmth of candle smoke. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was better than that it was real. And as they held each other beneath the quiet sky, the universe that once seemed cruel now felt small and kind, as if it too believed that redemption was just another word for love that lasted. Before you scroll away, take a breath and think about what this story really means. It's not about a billionaire or a maid or a viral scandal. It's about how truth outlives the noise and how love can still bloom even after the world tries to bury it. Somewhere out there, someone is carrying shame that isn't theirs to hold. Someone is fighting to be seen beyond their mistakes, beyond the labels the internet sticks on their skin. Maybe that someone is you. If you've ever been laughed at, called too much, or not enough if you've ever been told your story ended before it began, this is your reminder that it didn't. You're still here, you're still writing it, and no headline, no rumor, no person with a louder microphone can take that away. So when you watch stories like this, don't just watch them, feel them, live them, share them. Because every time one of us chooses empathy over mockery, we rewrite the algorithm that decides what matters in this world. Maybe that's what Ethan and Sophia's story was meant to show us. That real love isn't loud, it's steady. That redemption isn't about proving yourself to the crowd. It's about forgiving yourself when the crowd turns away. If this story made your heart ache, if it reminded you of someone who deserves a second chance, then tell them, send it to them, leave a comment below, and tell us what real looks like to you. Is it forgiveness, courage? Showing up even when it hurts? Tell us where you're watching from, because somewhere across the world, someone else is reading your comment and realizing they're not alone. That's the quiet magic of stories like this. They don't just end, they ripple outward. Maybe that's how healing works, not in grand gestures, but in tiny moments of recognition. A comment, a tear, a whisper that says, "I get it." If you believe in that kind of love, the kind that survives everything fake, the kind that doesn't need perfection or permission, then don't let this story fade when the credits roll. Subscribe not just for more stories, but for reminders that life isn't about what breaks you. It's about what rebuilds you. Every week we tell stories like this one. Stories that hold up a mirror to the human heart, that remind us that hope still sells better than hate. You can be part of that. You can keep this kind of storytelling alive simply by staying here, by watching, by believing. Because when you choose to listen to stories like Ethan and Sophia's, you're choosing kindness over cynicism. And that choice matters more than you think. So don't scroll just yet. Take one last moment to sit with the feeling in your chest. The ache, the softness, the truth that maybe you too have survived something that should have broken you and you're still standing. That's what real looks like. If you felt that too, drop a heart in the comments, tell us what love means to you, and hit subscribe so we can keep writing stories that remind the world what it means to be human again.